At our 6-year anniversary dinner, my husband raised his glass and toasted to single, free, and back on the market. While I sat there in shock, he handed me a t-shirt that read, 6 years of disappointment. His friends clapped, his dad smirked. So I stood up, took a deep breath, and made an announcement that silenced the entire restaurant. I, 31F, never imagined my 6-year anniversary would become the night that changed everything. The restaurant was packed, the kind of upscale place where conversations happen in hushed tones, and the lighting makes everyone look like they're in a movie. My husband had insisted we celebrate here, said it would be special. He'd even invited his friends and his father, which should have been my first red flag. We'd been having problems, sure. What couple doesn't after 6 years? But I thought we were working through them. I thought tonight was supposed to be about us reconnecting, about remembering why we fell in love in the first place. I wore the dress he'd bought me for my birthday, did my hair the way he used to say he loved. I wanted this to work. His friends arrived first, the same group that had never really warmed up to me, always making jokes I wasn't quite included in. Then his father showed up, that man who'd made it clear from day one that he thought his son had settled. They all seemed unusually cheerful, sharing looks I couldn't quite read. Dinner progressed normally enough. We ordered, made small talk about work and weekend plans. But there was something electric in the air, like everyone was waiting for something. My husband kept checking his watch, and his friends kept glancing at each other with barely contained grins. Then came dessert, and with it, the moment that would replay in my mind for weeks afterward. My husband stood up, his chair scraping against the floor loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. He raised his wine glass high, and the restaurant's ambient chatter seemed to fade as if the universe itself was holding its breath. He announced that he wanted to make a toast, his voice carrying across our section of the restaurant. He talked about 6 years, about journeys, about new beginnings. Then he said the words that felt like ice water in my veins. He was toasting to being single, free, and back on the market. I sat there frozen, my fork halfway to my mouth, dessert forgotten. The words didn't compute at first. Single? Free? Back on the market? I looked around the table, expecting someone to laugh, to tell me this was some kind of twisted joke. Instead, I saw his friends raising their glasses with enthusiasm, his father's smirk growing wider. But he wasn't done. From under the table, he produced a gift bag, the kind you'd give at a birthday party, complete with tissue paper. He handed it to me with a flourish, telling me to open it, that it was a special anniversary gift. My hands shook as I reached into the bag. The fabric felt soft, cotton maybe. I pulled it out slowly, and there it was, a t-shirt. Bright red letters across the front read, 6 years of disappointment. The restaurant seemed to tilt around me. Conversations at other tables had stopped completely now. I could feel dozens of eyes on us, could hear the uncomfortable silence that had fallen over what should have been a romantic evening for couples throughout the room. His friends started clapping, slow at first, then building to genuine applause. One of them called out that it was about time. Another said something about finally being free to find someone worthy. His father raised his glass higher and made a comment about second chances. I stared at the shirt in my hands, at the cruel words that were supposed to summarize our entire relationship. 6 years of my life reduced to a punchline. 6 years of supporting his career changes, of moving across the country for his job, of putting my own dreams on hold. 6 years of believing we were building something together. The humiliation was suffocating. Every person in that restaurant was watching this public execution of my marriage, my dignity, my heart. I could see phones being discreetly pulled out, could imagine this moment being shared on social media within minutes. The woman who got dumped via t-shirt at her anniversary dinner. But then something shifted inside me. The shock began to crystallize into something else entirely. Clarity. Cold, sharp clarity. I stood up slowly, the t-shirt still in my hands. The restaurant was so quiet I could hear the kitchen staff working in the back. I looked around the table at these men who thought they were witnessing my destruction, who thought this was entertainment. I told them I had an announcement to make too. My voice was steady, carrying clearly across the restaurant. I said I wanted to thank my husband for making this so much easier than I'd expected. Then I began to speak, and with each word, I watched the smug expressions around the table begin to change. I told them about the private investigator I'd hired 3 months ago, about the photos sitting in my car right now, about his secretary, about the hotel receipts, about the credit card statements that didn't match his stories about working late. I told them about the lawyer I'd already consulted, about the divorce papers that were being filed Monday morning, about how I'd been gathering evidence for months, building an airtight case. But I wasn't finished. I told them about the business he thought I knew nothing about, the one he'd been building with money from our joint accounts, money he'd been siphoning off for over a year, the business that was technically half mine since we lived in a community property state. I told them about the house, the one in my name because his credit had been shot when we got married, The house he'd assumed he'd get to keep. I told them about the trust fund he didn't know I had. The one my grandmother had left me with very specific instructions about protecting it from fortune hunters. The one my lawyer had helped me keep completely separate from our marital assets. The color was draining from my husband's face now. His friends had stopped clapping. His father's smirk had vanished entirely. But I still wasn't done. I told them about his boss, who happened to be a family friend of mine from childhood. About the conversation we'd had last week regarding employee conduct and company policies about affairs with subordinates. I told them about the photos I'd already shared with his secretary's husband. About the conversation that poor man and I had planned for tomorrow morning. I told them about the social media accounts I'd discovered, the dating profiles that were about to become very public, complete with screenshots and timestamps. The restaurant was dead silent now. Even the kitchen had gone quiet. Every single person in the place was hanging on my words. I held up the t-shirt, examining it in the light. I told them it was actually perfect, because disappointment was exactly what they were all about to experience. I told them that while they'd been planning this little humiliation, I'd been planning something much more comprehensive. That while they thought they were destroying me, I'd been systematically dismantling the life he'd built on lies. I told them that by Monday, he'd be unemployed, homeless, and facing a very expensive divorce. That his secretary would be in the same boat. That his father might want to reconsider that smirk, because the family business he'd been so proud of was about to lose its biggest client, my family's company. I folded the t-shirt neatly and placed it on the table. I told them they could keep it as a memento of the night they learned not to underestimate the woman they'd spent 6 years dismissing. I picked up my purse, left money for my portion of the dinner, and told them to enjoy the rest of their evening. I mentioned that they might want to savor it, because things were going to get very different very quickly. As I walked toward the exit, the entire restaurant erupted in applause. Real applause this time, not the mocking kind his friends had offered. People were standing up, clapping, some even cheering. A woman at a nearby table told me I was a queen. An older gentleman nodded approvingly and said something about justice being served. I walked out of that restaurant with my head high, leaving behind 6 years of disappointment and walking toward a future that was entirely my own. Update 1. It's been a week since the restaurant incident, and I wanted to share what's happened since then. The fallout has been even more spectacular than I anticipated. Monday morning arrived like clockwork. The divorce papers were served at his office, right in front of his colleagues. His boss called him in for a meeting an hour later. By lunch, he was cleaning out his desk. The secretary's husband had their conversation as planned. Apparently, she tried to deny everything until he showed her the photos. She's now staying with her sister and facing her own divorce proceedings. My ex has been calling nonstop, leaving voicemails that range from angry to desperate to downright pathetic. He keeps saying he can explain everything, that it wasn't what it looked like, that we can work this out. He even showed up at my office yesterday, but security escorted him out after I made it clear I had nothing to say to him. His father called too, trying to play mediator. He suggested we could handle this quietly, keep it in the family. I reminded him that his family had made their position quite clear at the restaurant. I also mentioned that my family's company would be terminating their contract with his business effective immediately. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. The house situation has been particularly satisfying. Since it's in my name, he has no legal right to be there. I had the locks changed Tuesday morning and left his belongings in boxes on the front porch. He tried to argue with the locksmith, but there wasn't much he could do. His friends have been notably absent from his life lately. Apparently, being associated with someone who's about to be financially ruined isn't as appealing as they thought. Fair weather friends, as my grandmother used to say. The business he'd been building behind my back is now frozen pending the divorce proceedings. My lawyer was very thorough in documenting how marital funds had been used without my knowledge or consent. He's looking at having to buy out my half or dissolve it entirely. Update 2. 2 weeks have passed, and the legal machinery is grinding forward with beautiful efficiency. My lawyer has been worth every penny. She's methodical, ruthless, and absolutely brilliant at her job. The discovery phase has revealed even more than I initially knew. Apparently, the affair with his secretary wasn't his first. There were at least 2 others over the past 3 years, all carefully hidden but not carefully enough to escape a thorough investigation. The financial picture is even worse for him than I'd hoped. The business he'd been building was essentially a house of cards, funded entirely by money he'd been stealing from our accounts. Without that steady stream of cash, it's collapsing rapidly. His secretary lost her job too, of course. Her husband filed for divorce the same week I did. She's been trying to reach out to me, apparently wanting to apologize or explain or something. I've blocked her on everything. I have no interest in her excuses. The social media fallout has been intense. Someone at the restaurant that night filmed part of my speech and posted it online. It's been shared thousands of times, with comments ranging from supportive to absolutely savage toward my ex. He's had to delete all his social media accounts. My family has been incredibly supportive throughout all of this. My parents never liked him anyway. They always said something felt off about him. My sister has been staying with me most nights, bringing wine and terrible movies, and helping me remember who I was before I became half of a couple. The strangest part has been the outpouring of support from people I barely knew. Colleagues, neighbors, even the barista at my coffee shop have been checking on me. Apparently, my story has resonated with a lot of people who've been in similar situations. Update 3. A month has passed since that night at the restaurant, and I'm writing this final update from my newly redecorated living room. The house feels completely different now, lighter, more like home than it has in years. The divorce was finalized last week. My lawyer's thoroughness paid off in spectacular fashion. I kept the house, obviously, along with most of our assets. He's responsible for all the debt he accumulated for his failed business venture. The prenup I'd insisted on 6 years ago, the one he'd complained about endlessly, protected my family money completely. He's moved back in with his parents, which I'm sure is doing wonders for his ego. His father's business did lose our family's contract, and from what I hear, they're struggling to replace that income. Sometimes consequences have a way of spreading exactly where they need to. The secretary and her ex-husband have both moved away. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she's working at a restaurant now, trying to rebuild her life. I don't wish her ill, but I don't wish her well either. She made her choices. As for my ex, I haven't heard from him in 2 weeks. The last voicemail was him begging me to reconsider, saying he'd changed, that he realized what he'd lost. Too little, too late doesn't begin to cover it. I've started dating again, which feels surreal after 6 years. Nothing serious yet, just coffee dates and dinners with men who actually seem to respect me. It's amazing how different it feels to be with someone who listens when you talk, who doesn't make you feel like you're asking for too much when you expect basic decency. Work has been going incredibly well. Without the constant stress of a failing marriage, I've been more focused and creative than I've been in years. I got a promotion last week, along with a raise that makes me completely financially independent. The t-shirt is framed in my office now, a reminder of the night I stopped being a victim and started being the architect of my own life. 6 years of disappointment. He was right about that. But the disappointment wasn't me. It was him and everything he represented. Looking back, I realized that night at the restaurant wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a much better one. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Sometimes people do you a favor when they show you exactly who they are. I'm not the same woman who walked into that restaurant 6 weeks ago. I'm stronger, smarter, and infinitely more selective about who I allow into my life. The next man who wants to be with me will have to earn that privilege, not assume it's his right. And if anyone ever tries to humiliate me in public again, well, they'll discover that I've learned a few things about fighting back.